The early morning sunlight spilled across the quiet streets of Meadowbrook, a small town nestled amidst rolling green hills. Though tranquil, Meadowbrook was no stranger to the challenges faced by its close-knit community. In this town, where neighbors still greeted one another by name, lived Clara Bennett, a nurse known for her tireless devotion to her patients. Clara's life was simple but meaningful. She spent most of her days at the Meadowbrook Community Health Center, providing care to those who couldn't always afford it. Despite her own modest salary, she was always willing to go the extra mile for those in need. Her colleagues often teased her about being too soft-hearted, but Clara would only laugh and say, "Caring doesn't come with a price tag." That morning, Clara was finishing her rounds when she noticed a familiar name on the appointment list: Eleanor Harper. Eleanor was an elderly widow who lived alone in a small, aging house at the edge of town. She had once been a schoolteacher, beloved by generations of Meadowbrook children, but her retirement savings had dwindled over the years. Now, she survived on a meager pension and the occasional kindness of her neighbors. When Clara entered the examination room, she found Eleanor sitting on the edge of the examination table, her hands clasped tightly around her worn handbag. Her lined face brightened when she saw Clara. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," Clara greeted warmly. "What brings you in today?" Eleanor hesitated, her eyes dropping to her lap. "I've been feeling a bit off lately, dear. I didn't want to bother anyone, but it's been hard to shake." Clara examined her with gentle efficiency, her brow furrowing slightly as she listened to Eleanor's symptoms. It didn't take long to identify the issue: a chronic condition that, while manageable, would require daily medication. She explained this carefully to Eleanor, writing down the prescription with a reassuring smile. "You'll be feeling better in no time," Clara promised. Eleanor's face faltered as she glanced at the slip of paper in Clara's hand. "How much do you think it'll cost?" Clara paused. She knew the medication wasn't cheap, even with the clinic's discount program. She watched as Eleanor's shoulders sagged under the weight of her unspoken worry. "I'll check the pharmacy's price for you," Clara offered gently, determined to find a solution. "Why don't you rest here for a moment?" In the break room, Clara made a call to the local pharmacy. As she feared, the cost of the medication was far beyond what Eleanor could afford. The thought of Eleanor going without it, of her condition worsening, gnawed at Clara's heart. She leaned against the counter, thinking hard. When she returned to Eleanor, Clara placed a hand on the older woman's arm. "Let me help you, Mrs. Harper. You shouldn't have to choose between your health and your finances." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but she shook her head. "You've done enough, Clara. I can't let you do more." Clara smiled softly. "Sometimes we all need a little help. You've spent your life giving to others. Let me do the same for you." That evening, after her shift ended, Clara stopped by the pharmacy. She used her own money to purchase the medication, carefully wrapping it in a small brown paper bag. It wasn't an expense she could easily afford, but the thought of Eleanor going without was unbearable. Clara didn't consider it a sacrifice, it was simply the right thing to do. When Clara arrived at Eleanor's home, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the modest garden. Eleanor opened the door, surprised to see Clara standing there with the bag in hand. "I thought I'd save you a trip," Clara said with a grin. Eleanor took the bag with trembling hands, her voice catching as she whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." "You just take care of yourself," Clara replied. "That's thanks enough." As Clara walked back to her car, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She didn't realize that her small act of kindness had set something extraordinary in motion, something that would soon change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Clara woke up the next morning to the faint patter of rain on her window. The cool air felt refreshing as she prepared for another day at the health center. She thought briefly of Eleanor and hoped the medication had already started to ease her discomfort. The thought gave Clara a sense of purpose as she packed her lunch and headed out the door. At the clinic, the usual hustle and bustle of patients filled the hallways. Clara moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, yet her thoughts kept drifting back to Eleanor. By mid-afternoon, a young receptionist named Mia approached her with a puzzled look. "Clara, there's a gentleman asking for you at the front desk," Mia said. "He's a bit vague about why he's here, but he seems determined." Curious, Clara wiped her hands on a paper towel and headed toward the lobby. Standing there was a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a well-worn jacket and holding a large umbrella. He looked up as she approached, his expression both warm and earnest. "Ms. Bennett?" he asked. "That's me," Clara replied, extending her hand. "How can I help you?" "I'm Aaron Harper," the man said, shaking her hand firmly. "Eleanor Harper's grandson." Clara's eyes widened in recognition. Eleanor had spoken fondly of her grandson, though he lived in a neighboring city and could only visit occasionally. "Of course," Clara said. "It's nice to meet you. Is everything all right with Mrs. Harper?" "She called me last night," Aaron explained, his voice tinged with emotion. "She told me about what you did. The medication, the visit. She's been struggling quietly for so long, and I had no idea. You didn't have to step in, but you did, and it means more than I can say." Clara's cheeks flushed. "I'm glad I could help. Your grandmother is a wonderful woman, and I only did what anyone would." Aaron shook his head. "You did what few would. And I want to repay you for your kindness." Clara raised a hand, waving off the offer. "There's no need for that. I'm just happy she's getting what she needs." But Aaron was undeterred. "I know you're humble about it, but your generosity isn't something we take lightly. Please, let me do anything to show our gratitude." Clara smiled politely, assuming the matter would end there. Yet over the following days, small gestures of thanks began to appear. A bouquet of fresh wildflowers arrived at the clinic's front desk, accompanied by a handwritten note from Eleanor. A delivery driver brought Clara a gift card for groceries, though the sender remained anonymous. And one evening, Clara returned home to find a basket of baked goods and a carefully wrapped woolen shawl on her porch, with a note tucked inside that read, "To keep you warm on the days you care for others." Though touched by these gestures, Clara continued her work as usual, never expecting anything in return. Life at the clinic remained busy, with new patients seeking her care every day. However, her encounter with Eleanor had planted a seed of change in her heart. She began to wonder how many other patients were quietly struggling, unable to afford the treatments they needed. The thought weighed on her, and soon Clara found herself taking action. In her spare time, she began reaching out to local charities and community organizations, hoping to establish a small fund to assist patients in need. At first, progress was slow. Donations trickled in sporadically, and Clara found herself juggling the demands of the clinic with her newfound mission. Yet she remained undeterred, spurred on by the memory of Eleanor's tearful gratitude. Weeks later, Clara received a surprising phone call. It was from Aaron, who had heard about her efforts to create the fund. He wanted to help, and he had connections with local businesses and donors who might be willing to contribute. Clara was stunned but grateful. Together, they began organizing a small fundraising event, a modest dinner and auction at the town hall. The preparations were challenging, with Clara balancing her nursing duties and the logistics of the event. But as the date approached, she found herself surrounded by a growing circle of volunteers. Many were former patients or their families, eager to support Clara's cause. It was as if her single act of kindness toward Eleanor had rippled outward, inspiring others to contribute in their own ways. The evening of the fundraiser arrived, and the town hall buzzed with energy. Clara stood near the entrance, greeting guests and marveling at the turnout. Tables were adorned with homemade centerpieces, and a small stage had been set up for the auction. Aaron approached her, a clipboard in hand and a smile on his face. "Looks like the whole town showed up," he said. "You've got quite the following, Clara." She laughed, shaking her head. "This isn't about me. It's about helping people who need it." Aaron's expression softened. "It's about both. Your kindness lit the spark, and now look at what it's become." As the night unfolded, Clara felt a swell of gratitude and humility. Bids poured in during the auction, and donations exceeded their expectations. At the end of the evening, Erin handed Clara a sealed envelope containing the final tally. She opened it slowly, her eyes widening as she saw the amount. "This will help so many people," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Erin placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's thanks to you. And it's just the beginning." Clara didn't know what lay ahead, but in that moment she felt a deep sense of purpose. She realized that small acts of kindness, like the one she had extended to Eleanor, could grow into something far greater. And as the rain began to fall outside the hall, she felt a warmth within her that no storm could ever extinguish. The morning after the fundraiser, Clara sat in her small kitchen, staring at the envelope on the table. She hadn't yet decided how to use the funds they'd raised, but the possibilities stirred her imagination. She envisioned a program at the clinic that could provide free or discounted medication for patients in need, ensuring that no one in Meadowbrook would have to suffer the way Eleanor had. The idea excited her, though she knew it would take careful planning and more effort than she had ever undertaken. As she sipped her coffee, Clara's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and saw Erin's name. Answering, she was greeted by his upbeat voice. "Good morning, Clara," he said. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," Clara replied. "What's on your mind?" "I was thinking about last night," Erin said. "It was amazing, but I realized something. There's so much more potential here. If we could bring more awareness to what you're doing, we might be able to expand it even further." Clara hesitated. "I wouldn't even know where to start." Luckily, Erin continued. "I know a few people who might be able to help. How about a meeting later this week? We can brainstorm some ideas." Though she felt slightly overwhelmed by the suggestion, Clara agreed. She knew Erin's enthusiasm was genuine, and his connections could open doors she couldn't access on her own. Later that week, they met at a small cafe in town, joined by two of Erin's friends, a marketing specialist named Lydia, and a local journalist named Ben. Clara felt out of her depth as they began discussing outreach strategies, but their excitement was contagious. Lydia proposed creating a social media campaign to share stories of patients who had benefited from the clinic's care, while Ben offered to write an article for the town newspaper highlighting Clara's work. "We need to put a face to this effort," Lydia said, gesturing toward Clara. "People connect with real stories, and yours is one that will inspire them." Clara felt her cheeks flush. "I'm not sure about being in the spotlight. This isn't about me, it's about the patients." "And that's exactly why people will respond," Ben said. "You're doing this for the right reasons, and that's what makes it powerful." Despite her reservations, Clara agreed to participate. Over the following weeks, she worked with Lydia and Ben to share the story of how the fund had started. They interviewed Eleanor, who spoke movingly about how Clara's kindness had changed her life, and they highlighted the success of the fundraiser. As the story spread, donations began to pour in, not just from Meadowbrook, but from neighboring towns and even farther afield. Clara was astonished by the outpouring of support. Local businesses offered to sponsor the fund, and volunteers came forward to help with administrative tasks. The clinic's modest supply closet was soon transformed into a small, well-organized pharmacy stocked with donated medications. Patients who had once struggled to afford their prescriptions now found relief in the program Clara had helped create. Yet with this success came new challenges. The workload at the clinic grew heavier as word spread about the program, and Clara often found herself staying late to keep up with the demand. Though she was glad to help, the long hours began to take a toll. One evening, as she finally left the clinic after a 12-hour shift, Erin was waiting for her outside. "You look exhausted," he said, his concern evident. "You can't keep running yourself into the ground like this." "I'm fine," Clara insisted, though her weary expression betrayed her. "There's just so much to do." "Which is why you need help," Erin said firmly. "You've built something incredible here, but it can't all rest on your shoulders. Let me and the others take on more of the load. Clara hesitated. She had always prided herself on her ability to handle whatever came her way, but she knew Aaron was right. Reluctantly, she agreed to delegate more responsibilities to the growing team of volunteers and supporters. To her surprise, the transition was smoother than she expected. With others stepping in to assist, Clara found herself with more time to focus on her patients and the moments that had always made her work meaningful. One afternoon, as she reviewed a patient's chart, Eleanor arrived at the clinic for a follow-up visit. She looked healthier and more vibrant than Clara had seen her in years, a testament to the power of consistent care. As they talked, Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. "This is for you," Eleanor said, placing it in Clara's hands. "I've been working on it for weeks. It's my way of saying thank you." Curious, Clara unwrapped the package to reveal a quilt, its soft fabric stitched with intricate patterns. Each square told a story: a blooming flower, a shining sun, and a small house nestled in a field of green. "It's beautiful," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Eleanor replied. "You've given so much to me and to this community. This quilt is my way of showing how much you're appreciated." As Clara held the quilt, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She realized that while the work she had undertaken was challenging, it had created something far greater than she had imagined. It wasn't just about medicine or money, it was about the connections that bound people together and the way kindness could transform lives. Clara smiled at Eleanor, her heart full. "Thank you. This means the world to me." Clara decided to drape the quilt over a chair in her small living room, where its vibrant patterns brought a sense of warmth to the space. Every time she looked at it, she felt reminded of Eleanor's gratitude and the ripple effect of her small act of kindness. Yet, as rewarding as the journey had been, Clara knew there was still more work to do. Over the following weeks, the clinic's new medication program became a cornerstone of the community, and its impact was undeniable. Patients who had once avoided seeking care out of fear of the cost now came regularly. Stories of improved health and hope filled the clinic, and Clara often found herself moved to tears by the gratitude of those she served. One day, as Clara worked on organizing the growing inventory of donated medicines, Aaron stopped by the clinic with a proposal. "There's a grant program being offered by the state health department," he said, handing her a folder. "It's designed to support clinics like yours that provide community-based care. If we apply and get approved, it could mean funding for years to come." Clara looked over the documents, her eyes scanning the list of requirements. The grant would provide substantial resources, but the application process was complex. It required detailed documentation of the clinic's activities, financial records, and measurable outcomes from the medication program. The thought of tackling such a project felt daunting. "This is a lot," Clara said, setting the folder on her desk. "I don't know if I have the time to put this together." "You don't have to do it alone," Aaron said. "We've got a team now, people who believe in this just as much as you do. Let us help." True to his word, Aaron rallied the group of volunteers, who worked tirelessly to gather the necessary information. Lydia crafted a compelling narrative for the application, highlighting the stories of patients whose lives had been changed by the program. Ben used his connections to gather letters of support from local officials and community leaders. Clara oversaw the process, balancing her clinic responsibilities with late-night planning sessions. The effort brought everyone closer together, uniting them in their shared mission. When the application was finally submitted, Clara felt a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. Weeks passed, and life at the clinic continued as usual, though the possibility of the grant lingered in the back of Clara's mind. One bright autumn morning, as Clara was preparing to see a patient, she noticed Aaron standing in the doorway of her office, holding an envelope. His expression was unreadable, and Clara's heart raced. "This just came in the mail," he said, handing it to her. "It's from the grant committee." Clara took a deep breath and opened the envelope, unfolding the letter inside. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and then she gasped. "We got it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They approved the grant." Aaron's face broke into a wide grin, and he pulled Clara into a celebratory hug. Word spread quickly through the clinic, and soon the entire team was gathered, cheering and exchanging hugs. The grant not only ensured the sustainability of the medication program, but also provided funding to expand the clinic's services, including preventative care and health education initiatives. As the weeks went by, the grant's impact began to take shape. The clinic hired additional staff, including a part-time pharmacist and a social worker, to help patients navigate other challenges in their lives. A small but welcoming counseling room was set up, offering mental health support to those in need. The program that had started as a single act of kindness now touched nearly every aspect of the community's well-being. Despite the growth, Clara remained as grounded as ever. She continued to see patients daily, her focus always on providing compassionate care. One afternoon, as she sat with a young mother who was picking up medication for her asthmatic child, the woman paused to say something that struck a chord. "You've given us more than medicine," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given us hope." Clara thought about those words long after the woman had left. She realized that the true gift of her work wasn't the medicine itself, but the message it carried that people mattered, and that someone cared. It was a lesson she had learned from Eleanor, and one she was now passing on to others. As winter settled over Meadowbrook, the town came together for a community celebration at the clinic. The event was a chance to thank everyone who had contributed to the program's success, and the clinic was decorated with lights, banners, and photographs of patients whose lives had been changed. Eleanor was among the honored guests, her health much improved and her spirit as bright as ever. When it was Clara's turn to speak, she stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped tightly together. She looked out at the crowd, patients, volunteers, supporters, and friends, and felt a swell of gratitude. "This all started with one small act," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I never imagined that helping one person could lead to something this big. But what I've learned is that kindness is contagious. It grows and multiplies, and it has the power to change lives, not just for those we help, but for ourselves as well." The room erupted into applause, and Clara's heart swelled with pride. She knew there would always be challenges ahead, but she also knew she was part of something bigger than herself. The clinic had become a beacon of hope, and Clara's journey had only just begun. As the days turned to weeks, Clara's life settled into a new rhythm. The clinic, now bustling with additional staff and expanded services, had become a cornerstone of Meadowbrook. Patients arrived not only for care but for connection, drawn by the warmth and humanity that infused every corner of the space. For Clara, seeing the program thrive was both humbling and exhilarating, though it came with an unexpected sense of vulnerability. "What if we can't keep it up?" she confided to Aaron one evening, as they walked along the tree-lined path behind the clinic. The air was crisp with the scent of pine, and the first snowflakes of winter drifted gently around them. Aaron glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I don't think you give yourself enough credit. You've built something sustainable, Clara. But even if challenges come, you're not alone. This town is with you, and so am I." His words comforted her, though Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something more was waiting just beyond the horizon, something she couldn't yet name. It was as if her heart was urging her forward, though to where, she didn't know. The answer arrived one quiet evening when Clara received an unexpected phone call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end belonged to a representative from a regional healthcare organization. They had learned about the success of Meadowbrook's program through Ben's article and wanted to visit the clinic. "We believe what you're doing here could serve as a model for other communities," the representative explained. "If you're interested, we'd love to explore ways to replicate your program on a larger scale." Clara's breath caught. The thought of expanding their work beyond Meadowbrook was exciting but also overwhelming. She knew it would mean stepping out of her comfort zone and navigating a world far more complex than the one she'd grown accustomed to. But the potential to help more people, to spread the spirit of compassion and care, was too great to ignore. The visit took place a few weeks later, with representatives touring the clinic and meeting with staff and patients. Clara felt a mix of pride and nerves as she shared the program's journey, from its humble beginnings with Eleanor's medication to its current role as a lifeline for the community. By the end of the day, the visitors were visibly impressed. "You've created something extraordinary here," one of them said. "We'd like to partner with you to develop similar initiatives in underserved areas across the region." Though Clara had anticipated the possibility, hearing the offer out loud left her momentarily speechless. She glanced at Aaron, who gave her a reassuring nod. "That's an incredible opportunity," Clara said finally. "I'd be honored to work with you, but I want to make sure Meadowbrook remains our foundation. This town is where it all began." The representative smiled. "We wouldn't have it any other way." In the months that followed, Clara found herself balancing her work at the clinic with meetings and workshops aimed at launching new programs in nearby towns. The experience was demanding but deeply rewarding, as she saw the seeds of her efforts take root in places that had long struggled with access to care. Through it all, she remained grounded by her daily interactions with patients in Meadowbrook, which reminded her of why she had started this journey. One snowy afternoon, Clara received a letter in the mail from Eleanor. The handwriting was shaky but familiar, and Clara smiled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a heartfelt note thanking Clara once again for her kindness and updating her on her health. But it was the final line that brought tears to Clara's eyes. "You've given me more than medicine, Clara. You've given me back my faith in the goodness of people. Don't ever forget how far your kindness has carried us all." Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, alongside the other mementos she had collected from patients over the years. As she sat there, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the struggles, the triumphs, and the quiet acts of love that had paved the way. Later that evening, Clara attended a town meeting, where the residents of Meadowbrook had gathered to celebrate the clinic's latest achievements. The room was filled with laughter and conversation, and Clara marveled at the sense of unity that had grown among them. When it was her turn to speak, she stood at the front of the room, her heart full. "This clinic isn't just a place for medical care," she said, her voice steady. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together, when we choose to see one another not as strangers but as neighbors and friends. Every success we've had belongs to all of you, because kindness doesn't just change lives, it builds communities." The applause that followed was deafening, and Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Though the road ahead would surely hold new challenges, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the evening wound down, Clara stepped outside to watch the snow falling softly over Meadowbrook. Aaron joined her, his breath visible in the cold air. "You did good, Clara," he said quietly. "This town is lucky to have you." Clara smiled, her gaze fixed on the glowing windows of the clinic in the distance. "I think I'm the lucky one," she said. "It's amazing what a little kindness can do." And as the snow continued to fall, covering the town in a blanket of quiet beauty, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, for the people she had helped, and for the gift of being part of something greater than herself.